I have to share, I am very pleased and very honored to have the opportunity to introduce a good friend, colleague of mine, Colonel Stephen Coffey, who is also a founding member of Patients for Patient Safety US, where we're all working together as patient activists to improve the safety of and equity of patients in the United States and, quite frankly, around the world. I have to say it's kind of fun working with Steve because, with Patients for Patient Safety US, we have our leadership calls, and Steve will say, wait a second, I have to find a quiet office in the Pentagon. And so he's just a really wonderful partner to have at Patients for Patient Safety US. Colonel Coffey has been, I'm going to say an activist for, I think, a decade, where I met Steve when he was just getting into patient safety, and you're going to hear his story. He was then a major, and then Steve and I had the pleasure of working with Steve when he was a lieutenant colonel, and he was then learning to tell his story about patient safety. And now Steve is an international spokesperson in patient safety, a plenary speaker, and he is a full-fledged colonel, of which I had the honor seeing him become a colonel. Steve is also an active member on Leapfrog's Patient Family Caregiver Expert Panel, and he's also an author of a best-selling children's book called Baby Stephen's Gift of Life, about his son's story that you're going to hear. So please join me in welcoming Colonel Coffey to the stage.
Good morning. Okay, we'll try it again, because the military guys, we like a little bit of call and response. Good morning. It is quite an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today. I will tell you that any time I can be outside of the walls of the Pentagon is a fantastic day. So I really do thank you guys for this invitation. What I did is I put up a couple disclosures up there. You're free to read that at your leisure, but essentially it says that the views that I will talk about and say today, they represent me. They do not represent the Department of Defense or the U.S. Air Force. They are solely my things. But I want you to also think about what we do in the military. So when we have presentations, we oftentimes will start by telling you what we're going to tell you. We will then tell you, and then we'll wrap up by telling you what we told you. And so I won't stray too far from that, but I want you to pick out throughout this presentation three things: the what, the how, and the why. Now, before we really get into the meat of the topic, I wanted to take a moment to just highlight an organization that Sue had mentioned, and it's so wonderful to see so many of the other founding members of PFPS US here. So myself and 9 other titans in the field of patient safety gathered together to really figure out how we could elevate the patient voice. And as you can imagine, when you have organizations that are grassroots and they kind of start out around the kitchen table, and we literally started out around the kitchen table trying to figure out how can we elevate that patient voice, how can we bring light and voice to something that is so essential to safe care. And as we got together, we figured that we would collectively start the Patients for Patient Safety U.S. chapter of the World Health Organization's Patients for Patient Safety. And so when we got together, it was not just about getting together to talk. We got together and we started to do things and become active. And Sue had mentioned being an activist. We wrote very provocatively titled articles like "Who Killed Patient Safety?" really causing us to think about what's really going on in patient safety. We started to partner not only at the local levels, but at the national levels with the President's Council of Advisor for Science and Technology, and with the work that Sue's been doing a lot with Project Pivot, to really elevate and bring to life that patient voice and the experiences that we have to bring to patient safety. But not only did we do papers, not only did we do councils, we've also done research. And so the fact that we have put our hands into every aspect of patient engagement, of safety, of quality, of healthcare shows what we do. And one of the things that I'm very proud about is the number of alliances and partners that we have. And what really stuck out to me is that one of our first sponsors, one of our first strategic partners was Leapfrog. And I think that really does underscore the commitment that the Leapfrog Group has to patient engagement, to safety. Now, we don't just have strategic partners, we also have champions, and this is my plea and ask of you that you would join us as a champion. Our champions span the country, they span the nation with the work that they do, and so we have champions that are in the clinical sense, some that are laypersons. We have champions, and we ask you to join us. Go to pfps.us, that is pfps.us, and join us. Now, I think that since it's early in the morning, one of the best things that we can do is somewhat have a little bit of a coffee break. And I generally set this up by quoting one of my favorite authors, Charles Dickens, when he said, "It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness." Those words never rang more true than with the birth of my son, Stephen Coffey II. With his life, my life would change forever, and the world would be introduced to a living miracle. So we're going to roll the video. Now, I'm not going to do this on the thing because I will probably mess it up, so I will let those guys in the back roll the video. That video gets me every single time. And I've seen it hundreds of times. I made the video every single time. That's my son, Stephen. Absolute joy. And what I really appreciate is he just celebrated his liver transplant anniversary about 2 weeks ago. And why this meeting matters to me, we just got out of the hospital last week and had a follow-up yesterday. So the journey of medicine continues. It's not an isolated incident, and the work that we do at Leapfrog is so important because it's not just an isolated incident. So Stephen was born on September 28th, 2012, and I was so excited because I knew that I would have a son to carry on the good name. And if you look, you can actually see in the picture, there's another one that was behind that my hand was actually cutting the umbilical cord of the, it was a lot harder than I thought. Like, when I looked it up on YouTube, it seemed like it was a lot easier. So either they gave me a dull pair of scissors, they didn't trust me. But I was excited when he was born because I knew that I would have somebody that would carry on my name. And I knew that he was going to be okay because we were in a hospital. The nurses took him away to do some newborn screenings and some tests, and they brought him back and they said, well, he's got a little bit of a low glucose level. He's got a high bilirubin level, and he's a little bit jaundiced, but they assured me he would be okay. And what I did not know is that those were classic signs for something that was very, very wrong with my son, and I was not treated as a patient that was a partner in care. When I think about this diagnostic process, it becomes the backdrop of what his experience was, and as I look through it, and I want you to pull out these points where I think that I could have had a difference or made a difference in his care had I been treated as a partner in the care. So you'll fast forward, we've been going back and forth to the hospital a number of times because his bilirubin continued to be high, and the nurses and doctors kept putting him under lights and said it would be okay. One night I was giving him a bottle, and I got this phone call from the provider who said, stop giving him milk, he's got galactosemia. Now I put this provider on a speakerphone. And I did that because I thought my wife and I would be able to hear the shared message that this provider is going to tell us. The doctor says, he's got galactosemia, you need to not give him milk. Go to a larger hospital, go to the larger hospital and tell them he has galactosemia. Now, I'll pause there because I want you to understand that there's some barriers to communication. There's a barrier to communication in the fact that I have the provider on a speakerphone, the message that's said and the message that's received. There's a barrier to communication in that the provider had a very pronounced accent. There's a barrier to communication in that me, the layperson, has to go to a larger hospital to tell them about galactosemia. Now, for those of you that may have forgotten or don't know, galactosemia is a metabolic condition whereby his body does not have the GALT1P enzyme to break down the simple sugar galactose that's found in human and animal milk. And so I'm supposed to communicate that as a layperson to providers. We go to the hospital, and what we find out is they do tests, and they say, are you sure? We don't think it's really galactosemia. It's only a trait. Don't change his diet because it's only a trait. You don't want to mess up how he processes and breaks down milk later in life. And ironically, I was discharged that same day, and as I went back home, I got a phone call from that smaller hospital, and they said, he's got galactosemia, don't give him milk. And I said, wait, the hospital you told me to go to, the larger hospital said he does not have galactosemia, he only has a trait, and they said don't change his diet. And the smaller hospital, despite having the right diagnosis, said defer to the larger hospital. Size does not always matter. As we fast forward to Thanksgiving night, and I am really excited because if I am the shopper in my family, I am that guy. I was the Black Friday shopper, so it is Gray Thursday right after Thanksgiving dinner. The turkey has settled. I am ready to go out to Walmart and do battle. I am dressed in comfortable clothes. I've got my hoodie. I am ready. And I'm sitting there, and I get this phone call from my wife, and she says, something's wrong with Stephen. He has a lump on his leg. We need to go to the hospital. So now I'm mad because I am in the line at the front. I've got my G.I. Joe with the Kung Fu grip. I am here. I don't kick this lady over to get it. Now I got to give it to the woman that's sitting here in the wheelchair, and I got to go home and see my child. I'm mad. But when I get home, we take him to the hospital, and we find out that I walk in dressed comfortably. The provider looks at me, and he dismisses my concern as being an overreactive parent. My wife's an overprotective mother. That the lump on his leg is just fatty tissue. It's a swollen lymph node. And he tells me to go home, and if things get worse, then come back. The very next day I come back. Now this time I don't come back dressed in comfortable clothes. I come dressed, and he knows that I'm a senior officer in the Air Force, and test or run. And these decisions are made. We find ourselves at Georgetown University Hospital. I'll never forget the day. It was November the 28th, 2012, and we were sitting in the PICU. Now, I did not even know that the PICU is where we send our sickest kids. And this resident is presenting my son to the attending, and they say, this is Stephen, our 2-month-old from an outside hospital who has fulminant liver failure secondary to galactosemia. And 5 days later, Stephen becomes the youngest liver transplant recipient in the country in 2012. And when I think about him now, and I think about our experiences, I think, and it makes me have these questions, these what-if moments. What if I had been treated as a partner in care? What if the doctors had a more conservative approach to medicine? What if there was better communication between the smaller and larger hospital? What if they communicated with me and made sure that I had shared understanding? Would my son have had a liver transplant? You know, I think one of the themes that you'll start to hear throughout that experience is that I felt that I wasn't heard. And oftentimes when patients are going through things and they experience diagnostic error, it's not necessarily the fact that there is error, but there's a perception of error that we sometimes have because I felt I wasn't heard. I came in for one thing and felt that I wasn't heard. I felt that you didn't listen and address my concerns. NIH did a study, so this is not just me making it up. NIH did a study and it also proved patients felt that the most contributing factor was that they felt that they were not heard. But there's this different nomenclature, if you will, of what it means for patients to be in the hospital when we talk about diagnostic error. There's always this access to care. I didn't have a problem with access to care because I was only 2 minutes away from the hospital. But I did feel that something was important and it was missing and that I didn't have information, that I didn't have the proper data, that I didn't know who to call when I had a conflict in my mind about what this smaller and larger hospital had to say. Those are all actual signs of diagnostic error. So when I think about this, and what I want you to take away is that the different taxonomy that we have from the patient's perspective, the provider perspective of what is error, what is harm. Now, it's interesting because if I were to ask and poll the room and tell you guys to caption this, many of you would say this is a giraffe that is painting a hat. I tried that with my son and said, son, what do you see right here? And he said, it's a giraffe painting a lady. And the thing that it points out is that there's a different perspective. There's a very different perspective. And so what I see as a patient, while I may not be clinically trained, I have something that is called experiential intelligence. So I don't know what it's like to have a liver transplant. I don't know what it's like to have a liver biopsy. My son does. And I can tell you that I know exactly what his liver enzyme levels, his AST, ALT, GGT, bilirubin numbers were from December the 5th until yesterday. I can tell you how his body reacted, how he reacted when his Prograf levels went up and down. That's experiential intelligence that I bring to bear, and these data points that have to be appreciated if we're going to make care safer. This is the part that I really want to focus on, is because the perspective we bring is so important. Now, I know there are some people probably in the back wondering, what does a police car, a fire engine, and an ambulance have to do with patient safety, besides the fact that those are emergency vehicles? I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you asked. That was you. If you did not know, emergency vehicles have different sirens. There are 7 different types of sirens, in fact, but I'm only going to talk about 3. 7 different types of sirens, I'm only going to talk about 3. Prior to the 1970s, there was actually no mandate to have electronic sirens on emergency vehicles. And in fact, NYU did a study and they found that emergency vehicles that had a siren arrived at their location in about 11 seconds, and those that did not have sirens arrived in about 14 seconds. So what that simply says, sirens save lives. Sirens save lives. Now, how I put this into the context of patient safety, many of you in the room are very familiar with the Institute of Medicine that report to Err is Human. 25 years ago, 99, they said, the siren of patient safety. There's a siren, the alarm has been sounded that we have a problem in patient safety, in healthcare rather, that people are dying at this alarming rate. The alarm was sounded. What I would liken this to is that we may have sounded the wrong alarm. Again, prior to the 1970s, before we had electronic sirens, we had a bell to signify that there was an emergency, but the bell became insufficient because the size of populations grew. The cities grew, the population became more dense. The bell was not as effective as it was when we were in a smaller town. When you think about a police car, it has a siren that is called a high-low pitch. And that siren alerts you that something is going on. It tells you that you have to move. Police cars are often running to something. They're running to the scene of the crime. They're running to the scene of the accident. They're running to something. In the scope of patient safety, that running to something is a retrospective look at what we're doing. When we have a serious safety event, we're running to that event. We're doing the root cause analysis to retrospectively figure out what happened then. The police siren. The ambulance siren is a little bit different in that siren is one that is a repetitive yelp. It's a repetitive yelp. And what you oftentimes find when you hear the ambulance, you see it running from something. It's running from the scene of the accident. It's running from the scene of the crime. And if you put that into the perspective of patient safety, we're running from including patients. We're running from including a perspective that is counter to ours. But the one siren that I really think we have to focus on, and why I said in the context of patient safety we may have used the wrong siren, is the siren of the fire truck. And it's interesting to me, when you hear a fire truck, number one, you hear the siren because it's actually a mix of the high-low pitch and the repetitive yelp, and it makes a wail. And what's interesting about it is that you will hear the siren, but you will not actually see the fire oftentimes. You will hear the siren and you will move without ever seeing and knowing that there's a catastrophic event that's going on. And so when you put that into the context of patient safety, we need to do what firemen do, because they would tell you that they spend more time doing fire prevention than they do putting out fires. We need to practice fire prevention in patient safety. What does fire prevention look like? Fire prevention looks like open notes. Fire prevention looks like having Leapfrog grades that tell us which places are the best ones to go. Fire prevention looks like partnership. It looks like inclusion. We should practice fire prevention and using those patients as resources. Now, I think it's really important when you think about patients as a resource to think about what you can do with a resource. So there are 4 things that I think you can do. You can spend resources, you can waste resources, you can save them, and of course you can invest them. When we spend resources, look at a patient as a resource and spend it, it becomes very transactional. Patients come into the hospital, patient gets well, patient goes home, irrespective of the experience. When we waste resources, the patient comes in, they have a very difficult experience. There's knowledge that can be gained from that experience, yet we choose to not focus on that. We waste that resource. We waste that opportunity to change. When we save the resource, we have a PFAC. But we don't use our PFAC for the information they can provide. We use them for ornamentation or confirmation. I need my PFAC to pick out the color of the wall for the hospital. I want my PFAC to only co-sign that we have a policy. I don't want you to push back, but just co-sign. I have them for ornamentation, that I have a PFAC, not for information that they can provide. But the last thing, and I think this is really where the secret sauce is when we use our PFACs and our patients and we invest in them and we partner with them. We value their perspective. We value the input. We value what they bring to the table. Now, I think it's really interesting when we talk about Leapfrog and we talk about some of the things that the work they've done. And so like Steve, I really do key in on the hospital scores and grades, because those are the things that I can easily translate to people. When I talk about going out to a restaurant, I always go back to the Yelp reviews. The first thing I do is go to a Yelp review or Google review, and I see how many stars do you have? Do I want to eat there? Do I want to spend my time there? So that's one of the important things that Leapfrog also provides for us. And so I think about that, and I think about how, I think it was in 2015, there was a study that said that 1 in 4 patients will experience diagnostic and harm. And the reason why that happens is that there is a lack of motivation and knowing where to start to fix the problems. Now, I think that all of us kind of sometimes run into this lack of motivation. So I will raise my hand and say I have the same challenges. We're getting close to the new year, and every January 1st, people have these New Year's resolutions. And I endeavor, like many of you, to move from resolution to resolve. And so it happens with me with fitness. So I have a fitness test every year in September. And every August, I pray to my God, and I say, God, if it is your will, please let me pass this fitness test. And if you do, I promise I'm going to do right. I'm going to eat right. I'm going to be right. Please let me pass. And in August, and then September comes around, and I pass my test, and I get a 95, and it's great. I'm excited. And then I say to myself, well, you said you should honor my sacrifice, so I deserve to have a full-fat latte. I deserve to go get 2 all-beef patties, special salsa, cheese, pickles, orange, and sesame seed bun. I deserve that because I don't have the motivation to go work out. Well, maybe I can work out in October. No, that's Halloween candy. Maybe November, December. No, that's the holidays. My motivation is waning. I can't really work out in January because that's the beginning of the year. It's too many people in the gym. I don't want to work out with all the people in the gym. It's too much. I can't really work out in March. It's cold in March. Can't do it in March. Can't do it in May because that's like Memorial Day. You don't want to do it in Memorial Day. And then June is my birthday, and so July is 4th of July. And then I find myself in August, lack of motivation, not lack of information, saying, Lord, if it is your will, please let me pass. I'm not the only one. Somebody else is in that same boat. Thank you for confirmation. Thank you. But it goes back to that idea that when we think about the challenges that we have, is it really a lack of information or motivation? If I were to put up a picture of a very healthy green salad and a double-double from In-N-Out, and if you're not from that side of the coast, a Five Guys double burger, and say, which one of these is more healthy, this salad or this burger? I'm pretty sure everyone here would pick out the healthy green salad. And why I bring you that metaphor is that it tells you that it is not about information, it's about motivation and the lack of motivation that we sometimes have. Now, what I really appreciated about it as I was doing a lot of research for this, Leapfrog had distilled down hundreds of recommendations into 2 broad categories, if you will, that really talked about, here's the playbook. So if you've not had a chance to look at this guidebook of recognizing excellence in diagnosis, I encourage you to do that. But the two that really stuck out to me the most was one was talking about leadership, and the other was talking about the diagnostic process. And I'll focus quickly on the leadership aspect. You know, as a senior leader in the military, and I've had the privilege of commanding hundreds and leading thousands of people in war and peace times, I can tell you one thing for sure, two things for certain, that culture will beat strategy every single time. Culture will eat strategy, will beat strategy every single time. My job is to be a thermostat. I'm a thermostat. When Colonel Coffee comes in and is having a bad day, everybody's having a bad day. My job is to set the conditions for success. Not to be the thermometer who just takes the temperature and figures out where to go. It is to set the conditions. It is to build a culture that allows people to have psychological freedom, that allows people to know that whether you wear a white coat and stethoscope or you're in housekeeping and environmental services and food nutrition, that your voice matters. It's to set the condition and the culture that for our patients that are engaging, that their voice matters. But not only does it deal with leadership, we also talk about the process. And I think the process is interesting because when you think about where we can engage and you go back to my son's experience, the process, there are many places where there are gaps and visible seams within that diagnostic process that if we decide to open the aperture and look at patient engagement, look at how we can use different data points better, look at how we can use the tools that are at our disposal, we're able to affect change. We talked a lot about the what with my son, his experience. We talked about the how with some of the tools that Leapfrog has. But I want to leave you, excuse me, leave you with one more metaphor. Now, many of you may or may not be familiar with the tale of Rip Van Winkle. And so if you're not, Van Winkle was a person who was hiking along the way, runs into a very mysterious person, and takes this magic elixir, and he falls asleep for about 20 years in the Catskills Mountains. And I liken it because when he woke up, I liken it to patient safety because what you start to see is that things changed. His beard had gotten over a foot long and it was white. The clothes he wore was a little bit off. They didn't quite fit. The style and the culture had changed a bit within the town. And he actually runs into a little boy and he asked questions and said, who are you loyal to? Who was your political favorite? And he said, I'm loyal to King George III, not knowing that the king had been out of power. And I liken that again to patient safety and to the healthcare industry because things have changed. The voice of patients is being elevated through organizations like Leapfrog, through organizations like PFPSUS. I liken it to the change that has happened in transparency, where we once had this idea that there was this wall of silence. We've started to make cracks into that wall and start to allow people to have these transparent notes and these open and crucial conversations. I liken it to medicine when I think about how we now have a choice and how Leapfrog helps us to better be informed about our choice. The challenge that I would think about with this metaphor is that, he was asleep for 20 years. But in medicine, have we really been asleep for about 25 years? How much has changed from 1999 and that report to now? But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful because as we talk about the what with my son, the how with the tools, we end with the why. And I think that the why is really simply stated. It's not even going to be a long slide because I think that our president and CEO said it best, that no one should have to die from a preventable error in the hospital. No one. And we do that because we collectively stand together. We do that because we collectively partner. We do that because we're informed. We do that because we believe that healthcare can be safe. In my mind, it's always been a people business. Thank you for your time this morning. I'm looking forward to an amazing conference.